What happens when your father is a saint, a martyr, a global icon whose name is etched into the very soul of history? What happens to the children left behind in the shadow of that colossal legacy? A legacy they never asked for. You know the name Martin Luther King Jr., but you've likely never heard the full, complex, and often heartbreaking story of the 4 children who inherited his dream and all of his burdens. Did they unite to carry his torch forward, or did the weight of the crown tear them and the legacy itself apart? In this video, we delve deep into the lives of the 4 individuals closest to the icon yet furthest from our understanding. We will uncover the unique and often tumultuous path of each of the King children. First, we'll explore the story of Yolanda, the firstborn, who tried to escape her father's shadow by finding her own voice on the stage. Next, we'll examine the life of Martin Luther King III, the heir apparent who was destined to walk in his father's footsteps, but struggled to fill his impossible shoes. Then we will unravel the controversial journey of Dexter, the businessman who seized control of the King legacy and transformed it into a multi-million-dollar brand, sparking bitter and public family feuds. And finally, we'll meet Bernice, the fiery preacher, the youngest child who inherited her father's powerful voice and became the moral conscience of the family. I have spent weeks digging through historical archives, court documents, rare broadcast interviews, and intimate biographies to piece together this profoundly human family saga. This isn't just another "Where Are They Now?" update. This is a story of profound love, public betrayal, billion-dollar lawsuits, and the lifelong battle over how to define one of history's most important legacies. Stick with me because what you're about to hear will change the way you see the King family forever. Number 4. Yolanda King. The world saw her as the firstborn of a king, the princess of the civil rights movement. But for Yolanda, the crown was a cage. Her story is not one of marches and political rallies, but of a quiet, desperate search for her own identity, far from the pulpit and the politics that defined her family and threatened to consume her. Yolanda Denise King was born on November 17, 1955, into a world that had already written a script for her. As the first child of Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King, she was immediately cast in the public eye. From her earliest days, she was a symbol of hope of the future of the movement. But for a little girl, that is an impossibly heavy burden to carry. She was only 12 years old on that horrific day in April 1968. She later recalled the moment her mother told her that her father had been assassinated. She said she didn't cry. Instead, she felt an immense anger, not at the world, but at her own father. In her grief, she felt he had deserted them. This complex mix of love, pride, and resentment would shape the rest of her life. Unlike her younger siblings, Yolanda consciously chose a path away from direct activism. The constant threats, the FBI surveillance, the public scrutiny, it had all taken a toll. She sought refuge and expression, not in politics, but in art. She attended Smith College, a prestigious liberal arts school where she studied drama and African American studies. It was here she began to forge an identity that was hers and hers alone. Her greatest professional achievement was a powerful one-woman play she co-wrote and starred in called Achieving the Dream. In it, she played multiple characters to reenact the civil rights movement, using her artistic talent to educate and inspire, but on her own terms. It was her way of honoring the legacy without being imprisoned by it. She was an actor, a producer, and a powerful public speaker. But she always drew a line. She was the daughter of a leader, but she was not and did not want to be that leader herself. While she largely stayed out of the ugliest public spats that would later engulf her siblings, she was not immune to the family's internal turmoil. She often played the role of peacemaker, caught between her mother's desire for unity and her brother's diverging views on how to manage their father's estate. She co-founded the King Center for Nonviolent Social Change with her mother, but later stepped back as her brother Dexter's more commercial vision for the legacy took hold. Tragically, Yolanda's search for peace was cut short. On May 15, 2007, at the age of just 51, she collapsed and died suddenly from a chronic heart condition. She had never married and had no children. Her life was a quiet testament to the immense personal cost of a public legacy. She carried the name with grace, but she spent her life trying to find a space where she could simply be Yolanda. While Yolanda sought to find her voice on the stage, her younger brother was being groomed from birth to take his father's place on the world stage, a destiny that would prove to be both his greatest blessing and his most profound curse. This is the story of the heir, Martin Luther King III. Number 3. Martin Luther King III. What is it like to be born with a name that is not your own, to be named after a legend? For Martin Luther King III, it meant a lifetime of unending comparison, a constant quiet battle to live up to an impossible standard, and a deep personal struggle that the public rarely ever saw. Born in 1957, Martin Luther King III, or Marty, as he was known to family, was the firstborn son, the one who carried the full weight of his father's name. Where his father was a thunderous, charismatic orator, Marty was naturally more reserved, gentle, and introspective. From the moment he could walk, the world expected him to march. From the moment he could talk, the world expected him to deliver a sermon. He was only 10 when his father was killed, and he grew up with the entire world watching, waiting for him to become a carbon copy of his dad. For years, he resisted. He wasn't a preacher. He was a political science graduate from his father's alma mater, Morehouse College. His first foray into public service wasn't at a pulpit, but in politics, serving as a county commissioner in Fulton County, Georgia. It was a respectable path, but it wasn't the path the world had chosen for him. The pressure, however, was relentless. In 1997, he finally accepted the role many believed was his birthright, president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, or SCLC, the very organization his father had co-founded and led to glory. But this is where the dream met a harsh reality. The SCLC was no longer the powerhouse it had been in the 1960s, and Martin III's quiet consensus-building leadership style was criticized as ineffective and lacking his father's fire. After a contentious tenure marked by internal power struggles, he was dramatically suspended from the presidency in 2001, only to be reinstated and then ultimately step away. It was a public humiliation that underscored the impossibility of his position. His greatest struggles, however, were not in the public square, but within his own family. As his brother Dexter moved to commercialize their father's legacy, Martin III found himself on the opposing side. He, along with his sister Bernice, believed that the core message of their father, a message of service and sacrifice, was being tarnished. This led to a series of ugly and deeply painful lawsuits. The brothers fought over control of the King Center and the King estate. The most shocking conflict erupted when Dexter and Martin, as the majority board members of the estate, decided to sell some of their father's most sacred personal possessions, his 1964 Nobel Peace Prize medal and his personal traveling Bible, the one used by President Barack Obama at his second inauguration. The proposed sale was a move so controversial it made international headlines, painting a picture of a family fractured by money and control. The legal battles dragged on for years, a tragic public spectacle that seemed to betray everything their parents had stood for. But as Martin III wrestled with the public face and the moral obligations of the legacy his brother Dexter was making, calculated moves behind the scenes. He was about to transform his father's dream into a powerful, protected, and profitable corporate brand. A move that would make the family millions, but would fracture it to its core. Number 2. Dexter Scott King. Not every child of a revolutionary becomes a revolutionary. Some become business people. Dexter King saw his father's legacy not just as a spiritual cause, but as a valuable intellectual property, an asset to be protected, managed, and monetized. It was a decision that made him powerful, and in the eyes of many, made him the villain of the King family story. Dexter Scott King, born in 1961, was perhaps the most deeply and silently scarred by his father's murder. He was only 7 years old. He later spoke of how the trauma shaped him, making him more introverted and analytical. As he grew, his physical resemblance to his father became uncanny, a constant reminder to the world of what was lost. But while he had his father's face, he had a very different mind. He studied business administration at Morehouse, a clear signal that his path would be different. In the mid-1990s, Dexter took the helm of the King estate and the King Center, and he brought a corporate mindset to the legacy. His philosophy was clear. His father's words, image, and recordings were valuable assets that had been used freely for decades. It was time, he argued, for the family to take control. He began to aggressively enforce the copyright of Dr. King's speeches and writings. Documentaries, museums, and even nonprofits were suddenly faced with hefty licensing fees to use the "I Have a Dream" speech. Under his leadership, the estate licensed Dr. King's image for a marketing campaign for a telecommunications company. They approved a memorial in Washington, D.C. that was criticized for its design and for using a Chinese sculptor and granite. Perhaps most famously, they sold a collection of more than 10,000 of his father's personal papers and books to Morehouse College for a staggering $32 million. To his supporters, Dexter was a shrewd protector of his family's financial security and his father's intellectual property. To his critics, he was selling out the dream, putting a price tag on a message that was meant for all humanity. His most controversial act came in 1997. Dexter traveled to a Nashville prison to meet James Earl Ray, the man convicted of assassinating his father. After a 20-minute conversation, Dexter stood before the world's media and declared, "I want to ask you for the record, did you kill my father?" When Ray said no, Dexter replied, "I believe you." He publicly championed the theory that his father was the victim of a vast government conspiracy, a position that put him at odds with many civil rights leaders and historians, but one he held until his death. The lawsuits against his own siblings became the defining feature of his leadership. He sued his sister Bernice and brother Martin for control of their father's possessions. The legal filings revealed a family in deep crisis, accusing each other of mismanagement and misappropriation of funds. It was a tragic, bitter war fought in courtrooms over the legacy of a man who preached peace and brotherhood. Dexter lived a much more private life in Malibu, California, away from the family home in Atlanta. After a valiant battle with prostate cancer, he passed away in January 2024 at the age of 62. His life was a complex paradox, the son who looked most like the icon, but whose actions were often seen as the most antithetical to his father's spirit. While Dexter fought for control of the legacy in the courtroom and the boardroom, the youngest King child was preparing to fight for its very soul from the one place her father held most sacred, the pulpit. This is Bernice, the true keeper of the flame. Number 1, Bernice Albertine King. She was only 5 years old when her father was stolen from her and the world. But of all the King children, it was the youngest Bernice who would most powerfully inherit his most dangerous and awe-inspiring weapon, his voice. Bernice Albertine King, born in 1963, has almost no personal memories of her father. Her childhood was defined by the aftermath of his loss. The trauma of his murder, followed by the sudden death of her maternal grandmother a few years later, sent a young Bernice into a period of deep anger and emotional turmoil. But from that pain, a powerful purpose was forged. She said she felt a calling to ministry from the time she was a teenager. She followed an academic path that uniquely prepared her for the family business, earning not only a Master of Divinity, but also a doctorate in law from Emory University. She was a minister and a lawyer, a potent combination for the daughter of Martin Luther King Jr. When Bernice was ordained as a minister, the world was stunned. Her oratory style was not just good, it was electrifying. The cadence, the power, the fire and brimstone passion. It was an eerie and powerful echo of her father's voice, reincarnated in his youngest child. She quickly became a sought-after speaker, a powerful advocate for nonviolence, and the most visible link to the spiritual core of her father's work. But she was no mere imitation. Bernice carved her own path, often taking public stances that were complex and sometimes controversial. Early in her career, her conservative theological views on LGBTQ+ rights put her at odds with the more inclusive vision of her late mother, Coretta Scott King, a staunch advocate for gay rights. Bernice's views have since evolved to be more inclusive, but it highlighted her determination to follow her own conscience. In the family wars, she was an unwavering soldier. She stood firmly with her brother Martin III against Dexter's commercialization of the legacy. During the legal battle over the sale of their father's Bible and Nobel medal, she was the public face of the opposition. In a press conference with tears in her eyes, she declared, "These items are sacred. I will not allow my father's most prized possessions to be sold to the highest bidder. It is not what my father would have wanted." Her passionate plea ultimately won the day, and the sale was stopped. Today, as the CEO of the King Center, Bernice is widely seen as the family's moral compass. She has dedicated her life to preserving and promoting what she calls Kingian nonviolence, a philosophy she believes is more relevant now than ever. She is the guardian of the spiritual flame, a daughter who, despite having no memory of her father, seems to understand the essence of his message more profoundly than anyone. So where are they now? Yolanda the artist and Dexter the businessman have now passed on. Martin the diplomat and Bernice the preacher continue their work forever, bound to a legacy that has been both their greatest honor and their heaviest cross. The story of the King children is not a simple fable with a happy ending. It's a messy, complicated, and deeply human story of grief, power, and responsibility. It shows us that the children of giants don't always stand on their parents' shoulders. Sometimes they struggle just to get out from under the shadow. It teaches us that a legacy isn't just about preserving the past, but about the constant, painful, and necessary fight to define its future. This profound struggle to live with a famous parent's legacy isn't unique to the King family. In fact, it echoes the surprising and often tragic story of another 20th century genius whose children were lost in his intellectual shadow. We previously created a deep dive into how Albert Einstein's world-changing brilliance was, for his 3 children, a source of immense neglect and pain. If you think the King family saga is complex, wait until you hear the truly untold story of the Einstein children. Click the video on your screen right now to discover a side of genius and the collateral damage it can cause that you have never seen before.